I used to be a police officer, and I've seen my share of crime. Not all cases can be solved through normal means, so I've turned to the paranormal for answers. I've assembled a team of experienced paranormal investigators to take on each unsolved case in an effort to shed new light on old mysteries. I brought us down here to the Colonial Parkway tonight to investigate a cold case that goes back to the 1980s. Now, this case has not been solved through normal means, so I figure why not apply some paranormal investigation methods to see if we can come up with some answers to this case. This was known as the Colonial Parkway Murders. The Colonial Parkway is a scenic road that connects the historic triangle of Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown. Along this 23-mile drive lie the remains of the first permanent English settlement, the colonial capital, and the site where victory was won during the Revolutionary War. The parkway was constructed between 1930 and 1957. Since its completion, locals and tourists find this area to be a peaceful escape from industry and commercial growth. Along this windy road, the cares of everyday life surrender to the serene beauty of the natural landscape, boasting dense forests, babbling brooks, and historical markers that paint the scenes of a bygone era. As with many historic sites, the Colonial Parkway also gained a reputation for being haunted, as stories of ghosts and strange occurrences emerged and began to circulate amongst the local community.
There is so much history in Yorktown and on the outskirts of Yorktown between there and Williamsburg that how could it not be haunted? Any place where there's such tragedy and such triumph, you expect to see ghosts or spirits lingering behind.
This stretch of road connects three of the most significant places in our nation's history. From the first permanent English settlement, the first capital of the United States, and the place where our independence was won. We're talking about several different wars that have taken place around this stretch of road: the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, battles with the Native Americans. And people have seen spirits along this road that are related to each. And this isn't just one or two claims of paranormal activity, it's several people. On a regular basis, people are reporting anomalies along the Colonial Parkway. Everything from strange flashes of lights in the woods to Native Americans that seem to emerge out of curiosity, perhaps, to watch who's traveling down the road. They've seen soldiers just walking along the side of the road and then disappearing into the night. They've seen men with tricorn hats going back to the Revolutionary War. Many strange reports found their source amongst the secluded landscape of the parkway. The seclusion also lent itself to young couples seeking the privacy of a local lover's lane. In 1986, the serenity of the parkway was shattered when it became haunted by something much more frightening than a ghost. On October 12, 1986, park rangers came upon a gruesome scene. A white 1980 Honda Civic rested halfway down an embankment between the Cheatham Annex Overlook and the York River. Inside were the bodies of Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Ann Dowski. Their throats had been slashed, and the smell of fuel emanated from the car. Kathleen, age 27, was a 1981 graduate of the United States Naval Academy. Her girlfriend, Rebecca, age 21, was a senior at William & Mary. On October 9, 1986, the couple left the William & Mary campus to spend some time together before Becky took a trip home. Nearly 3 days later, a jogger came upon Kathy's car and reported it as a traffic accident. The park rangers discovered Kathy in the hatch portion and Becky in the back seat, both covered in blood. The autopsy revealed that both women had their hands bound together with rope and both had rope burns from strangulation.
On top of the strangulation, their throats had been cut and diesel fuel had been poured over the interior of the vehicle.
After strangling these two women, the killer slit their throats, and he used a knife that was so sharp that he nearly decapitated Kathy. Also, they found these spent matches all around the scene, and they determined that he poured diesel fuel all over the interior of the car. Now, diesel fuel has a higher ignition point, so he wasn't able to light the car on fire. After realizing this, he pushed it over the embankment, and it must have gotten hung up halfway down the embankment and failed to actually roll all the way into the river.
Despite a clump of hair being found in Kathy's hand, the killer was not identified. Almost a year later, on September 22, 1987, the bodies of David Nobling, age 20, and Robin Edwards, age 14, were found at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge on the south shore of the James River.
David and Robin were hanging out with David's brother and cousin the night before their disappearance, or the night of their disappearance. After dropping everybody off, David drove back over to Robin's house, and she snuck out to meet him. No one knew they were together.
Sometime during the night, David and Robin each sustained a gunshot wound to the head.
They found the bodies out at Ragged Island, and both of the victims were shot in the head. David was also shot in the shoulder, which was an indicator that he attempted to flee, perhaps after they shot Robin.
At this point, authorities made no connection between the two murders. Then, on April 10, 1988, the disappearance of another couple from the local community gave authorities reason to believe that they had a serial killer on their hands. After attending a party near Christopher Newport University, 20-year-old Richard Keith Call and 18-year-old Cassandra Lee Haley disappeared into the night. The following morning, Call's red 1982 Toyota Celica was found at the York River Overlook along the Colonial Parkway.
At about 7:15 in the morning, Keith's father actually found the car abandoned, and he stopped and he looked inside, and he didn't see any clothes at this point, just a Chicago Bears jacket. Now, by the time the police arrived on scene, they found Keith's clothes, wallet, and eyeglasses folded on the back seat, and Cassandra's purse and bra on the passenger seat. What's interesting is between the time that the police arrived, the park rangers actually came and removed the clothes from the car. They didn't realize at this point that it was a murder scene. And when they did realize it was a murder scene, it was reported that they put the clothes back into the car.
Citizens in the local community were in fear for the lives of their teenage children.
There was a little bit of chaos and a little bit of mayhem that started infiltrating people's minds and psyches. They worried about their teenage daughters and sons because they knew that these were children that would go out and didn't specifically think that anything would ever occur to them, as teenagers often do. But a few of the things that they would warn you about was to stay away from secluded places at night, just for the sake of not being approached by somebody. They also warned you to not stop for any emergency vehicles or any police officers that you might find on the Colonial Parkway. They instructed people that Colonial Parkway was National Park Service land, and because of that, you would never find a regular police officer or a sheriff's deputy patrolling that street. It would always be park rangers.
As authorities worked day and night to find answers, each lead turned up more questions. On September 5, 1989, Anna Maria Phelps, age 18, and Daniel Lauer, age 21, went missing while traveling to Virginia Beach along I-64 in New Kent County.
What's interesting about this is the couple was heading eastbound on I-64 from Amelia County back to Virginia Beach. Lauer's 72 gold Chevy Nova was found in the westbound rest stop at New Kent. The police searched the entire area, they questioned several suspects, and turned up negative results.
Nearly 6 weeks later, hunters found the remains of Daniel and Anna Maria just off a logging road, approximately 1 mile from the rest stop.
When the bodies were discovered along this logging road, they were covered with an electric blanket that was in Daniel's car. They'd been exposed to the elements for so long and heavy rainfall that there was really no evidence that could be found. It was all washed away. and the remains at this point were pretty much just skeletal. They did, however, find a nick from a knife on one of Anna Maria's fingers, which led them to believe that she did sustain knife wounds.
To this day, the Colonial Parkway murders remain unsolved. The bodies of Cassandra Haley and Keith Call have yet to be found. One popular theory is that these murders were carried out by a member of law enforcement or someone pretending to be one. In each case, the driver's side window was found partially rolled down. Also, it would most likely take a person of authority to control two people, unless he had an accomplice. Let's start our investigation at the York River Overlook. Now, this was the spot where on April 9th, 1988, these two victims went missing and they were never seen again. So there's a couple of questions that we're trying to get answered here. One is where these victims are, and two, the identity of the Colonial Parkway serial killer. Now, here's the theory. The Colonial Parkway is very haunted. These locations that we're going to are not far from Belfield Plantation, which is a known haunted location. Also, there's been several Civil War era soldiers, Revolutionary War era soldiers, and Native Americans that have been seen along the Colonial Parkway. What we want to do is see if we can tap into any of these spirits to get them to give us any information on these killings.
Right.
Because it stands to reason that if this is indeed haunted, these spirits were here when it happened.
Yes.
And they were witness to these heinous crimes.
Yes.
So perhaps these spirits can give us some answers. Let's head up to the York River Overlook.
Okay.
And see what we can find.
We're here to find out if you know anything about the disappearance of Cassandra Haley and Richard Keith Call. This would have been about 30 years ago. A red car was parked here and abandoned. Do you know anything about that?
We don't mean you any harm or to scare you. We're just looking for some answers.
I didn't understand that. A guy brought a red car here and he left it here. And he might have gone and gotten in the car with someone else to drive away. Can you tell us anything about that guy?
Cassandra? Are you still here? I have these two devices in my hand. If you come close to this one, it'll light up for me. You think you can try to touch that?
Nothing managed to touch the K2 meter or mess with the EMF detector. We were kind of hoping for a little bit of a response there. It's kind of a high-pitched female voice.
We hear you. Can you tell us your name?
While we were there doing the spirit box session, it sounded like there were some things that were coming through in the first location.
Where did the people go that owned that red car? Do you remember anything about that night?
And their clothing was left inside the car, along with a wallet, eyeglasses.
I have these two devices in my hand. Can you go ahead and touch one of these? It'll let us know that you're with us. This one will beep. This one will light up for you. Can you give that a try?
The man who left the red car here, did he get into another car and drive away? With a woman or a man? They kind of sound like you said Honda.
Now along this stretch of road there's a place called Belfield Plantation. The plantation itself no longer stands. It played a very significant role in the tobacco industry. It was where Edward Diggs established the first place where he grew tobacco, and this is what turned Yorktown into this booming port town. So this was a fairly good-sized plantation, several fields of tobacco that he grew here, and to this day nothing's left there except for the family plot and a little bit of the foundation. But this area is really close to where one of these murders happened along the Colonial Parkway, and this area itself is reported to be haunted. People have seen strange things back there at night. I'm Jeff.
I'm Kyle.
And this is Linda over here. We want to know if there's anybody here with us that can tell us about the heinous crime that took place right here at this location. This was back around 1986. Did anybody see this happen? 2 young women get killed out here.
They drove a white Honda.
Now that location kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies. There were a few times where I thought I heard footsteps around Linda and I when we were performing the Spirit Box session. I actually had looked twice, I think, at Jeff's feet just to determine if he was actually taking steps or not.
Can you give us any information about that night?
I'd really like to know who killed them. Can you give us a name?
As night sets in and the shadows really start to fall over that parkway, it really does become a very eerie area.
Can you tell us if there was one person or if there were multiple people here that night that caused that tragedy?
Something really faint.
And if you're still here, people still want to know what happened. You're not forgotten. We want to help get your story out and solve the case.
So we went up the Colonial Parkway, tried a couple of different spots. The 2 spots where supposedly there were as evidence left behind of the murders that occurred there.
I thought it was actually pretty open compared to the other stops that we had taken. If anything happened there, I can't imagine somebody not seeing something personally, because it was very close to the road. It was a very small pull-off. It was not very private, in my opinion.
The Colonial Parkway, when you're driving down there at the time of day that we were driving down there, it's a very beautiful drive, especially when the sun's just going down. And it's hard to imagine in a place of such beauty that something so tragic happened, something so frightening.
And I'm curious to see what kind of things that we found on our recordings.
Now the next crime scene that we're going to is not actually along the Colonial Parkway, though it falls under the Colonial Parkway Murders because they believe the same man was responsible for it. Now this happened back in 1987 at a place called Ragged Island, just across the James River Bridge. So we're going to go up there and see if we can get access to the parking lot where this truck was found, and perhaps get any responses from any spirits that might be there.
Sounds good. So we're out here at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge, and this is just across the James River from where we were before. And this is kind of a not very isolated place. The parking lot isn't, at least, but it's just off of Route 17. But there is a trail that leads down to the beach. And this is where David Nobling and Robin Edwards were found. They were murdered out on the beach somewhere, and it took about 3 days after they disappeared before they were discovered. Now, the interesting thing about this case is that, for one, it didn't follow suit with the rest of them. The bodies were found with gunshot wounds, execution style, to the back of the head. The other cases usually involved a knife of some sort and used in some fashion. So that was one of the things that set it apart from the rest of the murders. Another thing was that it was here in Smithfield, not off of the Colonial Parkway. So they thought that that was a little bit strange as well. And for those reasons, they thought that perhaps this was a murder that was carried out by somebody completely different, perhaps a copycat murderer. But the similarities between the cases were just too many for there to not be some sort of a connection here.
All right, I'm Jeff.
Linda?
Kyle? Hi, Jeff.
Did I say hi, Jeff? That was a young girl's voice.
Is there anybody here with us right now?
Almost immediately when that spirit box came on, I swear I heard the name David come through it, which is very relevant. This was one of the victims that was murdered there. So to hear that name come through as soon as we turned it on and started asking questions was very interesting.
Me.
Who are you? Were the murders that happened here caused by the same person who murdered the people along the Colonial Parkway?
Something Morgan? Are we speaking to David Nobling or Robin Edwards? If we're not, then they were the ones who were murdered here down on the beach. And we'd like to know who killed them.
We turned the spirit box on, and it was quite responsive almost immediately. We heard a bunch of names come through, a few that sounded like it said Dave, and then David. And I do believe we heard deputy at one point as well.
Parking or parkway, that said.
Yeah.
I thought I heard parking.
Parking.
Yeah.
Thought it was like we were parking.
Oh, either one would be related.
Yeah.
Because they were parking out here.
That's right.
Did you know the person that attacked you?
Was he acting like a police officer or like a park ranger?
Yeah.
You know, the guy who committed these murders, or the men who committed these murders, they were never caught. They went on to murder other people. Just heard something down that pathway. Sounded like footsteps in the gravel. Yeah.
The whole time we're standing there at the head of this path that goes down to probably the beach, you just constantly feel compelled to look behind you and look down this path and keep your head on a swivel. It almost feels like something's coming up on you at any moment.
Robin, did you sneak out of your house that night to go hang out with David?
It's evil.
It's evil. That's exactly what it said. What's evil?
Are you talking about something else that's here? Car.
Are you trying to warn us about something that's here now?
I keep getting that feeling, personally.
This place is creepy. This place is
creeping
really,
me out.
really creepy.
It's like I'm like about to flee.
I know.
Evil.
That's it. It sounded like evil.
Evil. Roads.
We started to hear things coming through, voices coming through that were telling us leave. And we're standing there already feeling a little bit nervous or unsettled, and then you hear this voice coming through that is telling you leave, leave, drive, go. It's evil. Then what do you do but get even more creeped out than you already are?
We stopped here at this rest stop, the New Kent rest stop, westbound.
Yes.
And back in the day, rest stops used to be really creepy areas.
They were.
Not so much now. Now they're well lit.
Yeah.
I mean, I like stopping at rest stops now, but
Right.
back when, you didn't want to stop at a rest stop and linger for too long because
No.
there was a lot of movies about that type of thing.
Yes.
People getting abducted from rest stops. And this stuff that we're investigating here tonight is the stuff that you would see in movies, in those horror movies.
absolutely.
It's
Oh,
the
absolutely.
absolute scariest stuff that you can
Yeah.
imagine. Scarier than any ghosts
Right.
is the human factor.
Yes.
The person that commits these heinous crimes. I'm Jeff.
Linda?
Kyle?
There was a car that was left here at this rest stop. Who left that car here?
He would have left the car and left the keys in it most likely, and either gotten in a car with somebody else to leave.
Do you remember that happening?
Do you know somebody by the name of Daniel Lauer? L-A-U-E-R. We'd like to find out who committed these murders. Anything you can tell us would be helpful.
The spirit box was very quiet out here at the
It
rest
was.
stop. More so than it usually is at any given location. And usually when it goes really quiet like that, it's an indicator that there's nothing there.
Right, right.
There's no evidence that this rest stop is haunted. There's no spirits. It's not like the Colonial Parkway.
Right.
It's not like some other places where there's spirits reported to linger there that may have witnessed this.
Yes.
Our only hopes is that we could catch maybe the spirits of the victims are still drawn to where their car was last parked.
Right.
It's a very long shot.
Yes.
It was worth the shot.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was the last place where these murders, this series of murders took place.
Yes.
Not the last place, but the last place that we had to investigate.
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely had to come out here and at least try just to see if we could get anything. Now, I am eager at this point to get back and review this evidence. See if there's
Yes.
anything that we got in the recordings.
I am too, especially the ones from the wildlife refuge.
Oh man.
Yes.
Because that seemed to be the most active place that we went to.
And it was like non-stop.
Right.
From the time you turned the spirit box on
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
time we actually said, okay, we should probably get going.
Yes.
It
Right.
was just, it was
Yeah.
responsive.
So we actually had a lot on the spirit box that came through, both at the Colonial Parkway locations as well as the Ragged Island. Not so much at the New Kent County rest stop, but at these first couple of places I was extremely impressed by how much came through and by the nature of what was coming through. So I pulled a couple of these off. The first location was the York River Overlook.
Okay.
And that one was the one where Cassandra and Keith both disappeared, and their car was found at that location. Okay?
Right.
The red
Right.
Honda. Now, the interesting thing about this is that very soon into our Spirit Box session, we got an interesting response when we asked the question, where did he, meaning the perpetrator, go? And here it is.
I heard at the beginning of that what sounded like police.
Right, right.
So I don't believe, I know there's a couple clips you played for me. I'm not sure if this was one of them or not, but I definitely heard police hearing this for the
Police.
first time.
Right. And it actually says police car. The word car is after it, which
Right.
makes it even more interesting.
That's interesting.
Yes.
That is interesting. So it's almost like he could have been, one of the theories was that this was a member of law enforcement.
Right.
That he could have gotten into a police car.
Yes, yes.
And driven away.
And that was before we had even mentioned a police car, because we did ask on a number of occasions, was he acting like a police officer? Was he acting like a park ranger? Was he a police officer?
Right.
This was before we ever asked any of those questions. So whatever response came through here seemed even more valid. Now, another one that we got here, I threw in because I thought that it was extremely interesting, just because of what the nature of what is said. Now, this was when we asked, we said, we think that Keith and Cassandra might have been killed. Do you know where they might have gone? And here's the response. Now, it's kind of hard to hear. It's kind of a high-pitched sound right in the center there.
Right. I heard something with the I.
Mm-hmm. The long I in there. Yeah. Now, when you have it, of course, in the headphones through Audacity, it sounds like they're saying they're hiding.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's
now,
interesting.
I'm not saying necessarily that they are alive and hiding somewhere, because that really wouldn't make too much sense.
Right.
But it would make sense if they are dead and their spirits were hiding.
Their spirits don't
because they're afraid.
Right. That would make sense. But I do have to say, with that one, the last one not so much by any means, but that one, it almost sounded like part of a song to me.
Yeah, it very well could have been. Yes.
Right.
But because it's a spirit box, we don't know how this actually works, or how the spirits would manipulate these things. We don't know that they're not taking parts of speech or songs that they might find on the radio anyways.
So you would think
using those to illustrate their point.
You would think that possibly, if they can manipulate these radio waves, I mean, obviously they can't bring a part of a song that's not there and play it for us, but maybe they could block out and only allow certain things
pieces
that come through.
Yes, exactly. Now, that would also explain why a lot of times we'll ask a question and it'll take a very long time for a response to come through. And sometimes why we don't get any valid response at all. Because at certain times, it may be that answer, what they're trying to say, cannot be pieced together by what's there.
So both of those clips were from the same location?
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
Now, this one is from the same location as well. This is the last one we have from that particular location. Now, by this point in the spirit box session, we had already started asking, did he act like a police officer? Before we asked this particular question, or got this response, we had asked, what color was the car? Meaning, what color was the car that the perpetrator got into?
Right.
Because he would have had to have dropped off Keith's car, the red Honda, there at the drop-off, and get into another car. It would take a very long time to walk off of the Colonial Parkway. So this is the response when asking what color it was. Now, again, a little bit hard to hear, but amplified.
Now, I gotta say, I can't really make that one out. It sounds like a quick blip to me.
It is a very quick blip. The third syllable in the word is almost imperceptible on this. Now, what it sounded like it was saying through the headphones was burgundy. So, which, of course, there's not a lot of burgundy police cars running around out there unless it's an unmarked vehicle.
An unmarked, right.
Right.
And it could have even been the case where somebody, it wasn't even a police car at all, they just had a light that they would put on top of their car to pull people over.
Right, right. It could have been a car that looked like a police car, like one of the Ford Crown Victorias. Yeah,
right.
They used a...
and we don't have anything with a burgundy vehicle that's involved with this case, correct?
No, and in the research that I found, I had not found anything that indicated that there was a burgundy car. Now, the last one that came from the Colonial Parkway came from the other location, the one where it was the Cheetah Mannix Overlook. This was actually the location of the first murder, and this is the one where Kathy and Becky were pushed off of the embankment after they had been
So
killed.
the first murder was 1986. This was the second location that we investigated.
Right, that's correct. Yes, that is correct. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting is we got a fairly clear name here. And this was after someone had asked, did anyone see this happen? And this is the response that we got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm hearing something, it sounds like Mike Hecker.
Yes.
But it sounds like he's speaking with an accent of some sort.
Yeah, it does. A little bit of an accent, and, you know, not too much of one to where it makes it hard to understand.
Right.
Certainly not through the headphones. And that's exactly what I had thought it said, was Mike Hecker. Now, I did an abundance of research on the name Mike Hecker, just to see if something may perhaps be related. And I particularly was looking for a Mike Hecker somewhere in the United States or Canada that was a police officer or a park ranger or had been a police officer at one time. Now, of course, I found a huge amount of Mike Heckers throughout the country. You know, enough to cover front and back of one page. Right. Which is funny because the last name Hecker, I'd never heard of before.
Yeah, it is kind of a unique last name.
It is. I'd heard of Becker.
But you found perhaps a similar name?
You mean the Mike Hacker? I looked that one up as well, but I couldn't find as much on Mike
So
Hacker.
you looked up two variations of the name in case it was Mike Hacker, Mike Heckler.
Exactly, yeah.
And this, of course, we're not implying that this is anybody that's even related to the killings, of course.
Yes. Now, the one interesting thing that I found came when I Googled the name Hecker along with FBI, thinking perhaps this person could have been in the FBI instead of a local sheriff's department, police department. Mm-hmm. And what I found was an article that related to a man named Christopher Hecker. Now, back in 2012, this man was accused of threatening to kill Obama, and as well as sending other very threatening emails out to a bunch of local, government organizations and media outlets and things of that nature. Now, one of the things that he said in one of his emails was, quote, "Sooner or later, I will grab someone, maybe in the woods, on the trail, and beat the life out of them." There's also a Royal Mounted Canadian Police officer from British Columbia whose name is Mike Hecker. And this was just happened to be the location of another murder that occurred. I believe this one was back in the early 1980s. And again, it was a couple. It was a guy and a girl that had gone out for, a tour, basically vacation, a short vacation. And somebody offered him a ride and killed him for absolutely no reason. Didn't take their money, no rape involved. So sort of interesting, very similar. Not to say that this man is affiliated with these crimes in any way, but just an interesting...
No, but the facts are, this what sounded like that name came through the spirit box.
Right.
Causing further research into that name.
Yes.
And then finding all of these names, some which have either threatened to kill people or have been around murders.
Yes.
That is interesting. So that's pretty much it from the Colonial Parkway.
Right.
We went out to Ragged Island, and I have to say Ragged Island was probably my favorite location. I mean, this has to be in my top 5 of locations where I've personally just had an uneasy feeling and perhaps heard some strange things, at least at first listen, come through that spirit box while we're out there.
Right. Now, after you see what actually came through here, this will be even more of a favorite spot of yours. Now, this is only a handful of the things that came through. There was actually things that were coming through the spirit box the entire time that we were there. And so much of it related that I really had to condense it down to the things that I thought were most interesting.
Right.
And leave off the ones that might not have been quite so interesting, because otherwise we would be here forever.
Right.
So as soon as we got there and started up the spirit box, there was something that came through. Now, it contains a cuss word, which we know is not something you hear too often, if at all, on the radio. But this is the one that we got.
That to me sounded like a hip-hop song.
Well, the thing of it is that it's actually a sentence, but it's being formed by a bunch of different clips of audio from different stations.
Right.
Because it's different voices and different tones that come through.
Right, right.
Now, you want me to say what it sounds like?
Did it have a word that starts with a B perhaps in it?
At the very end, yes.
Okay, so it was get back?
Uh-huh. Get back, you threatening...
B word.
Right.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, we're not exactly sure who they're talking to.
Yeah, who would they have been talking to? Because, I mean, I guess it had to be maybe 2 out of 3 chance that it was you or Kyle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, unless they were calling you that, which is always a distinct possibility.
It's a possibility.
But, yeah. But, you know, it could have been me because I always wear either the St. Michael medal, you know, or I wear the other one, the St. Benedict medal. So it could be that maybe somebody saw this
and didn't like it. That could have been threatening. That could have been.
This is another one that came in only a few seconds after we asked our first question.
Right.
And this one is so greatly relates to the situation that it's almost funny.
I'm David. And David was one of the victims that was murdered out there.
Right. That's exactly right. David and Robin, David Nobling and Robin Edwards were the ones that were killed out there.
Interesting.
So it says, I'm David, the second that we get there.
Now that's a pretty, if you think about, when you think about all the names on a radio station, all the channels on a radio station.
Yes.
At any given second, all the different parts of speech that are coming through the radio.
Right.
For you to get a name that directly relates to that location now,
I know.
I'm always a little bit skeptical about certain things and question, could this be radio chatter or could this be a song? Like the last one really still sounds like a hip-hop song to me.
Right.
But with this one, what are the odds that in the short time we were there,
yes,
it would say David?
Yeah, that's right. Now, the next one that I have is when we had asked how many people were here. And what we were meaning by that was how many people showed up and actually attacked you. Now, we asked this because one of the theories is that because of the control that this murder or murderers happen to have over the victims, it could have actually been more than one perpetrator to work in conjunction.
Right, they believe you had an accomplice.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, in this situation, you always have a more dominant person and you have a weaker person. Now, the weaker person in the duo often ends up either dead or scared that he's going to be killed, and he doesn't say a word.
Right.
So, could have been that situation as well.
And if these two, if it was an accomplice, of course, speaking hypothetically, if these two were in the military together,
right,
and perhaps one of them was transferred, or both of them were transferred to 2 different places,
yes,
the murders would stop.
The murders
because they're not
would
going to
stop.
do it unless they're together.
Yes, absolutely.
So what's the next clip that you picked up out there at Ragged Island?
So this is a response to it, and like I said, we had asked how many people. Only 2 people.
Only 2 people.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I heard only something people at first, and then I wasn't sure if it was only 3 people or if it was only 2 people.
I listened to that.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. I listened to it quite a few times just to be sure of what I was hearing. But it definitely said only 2 people.
Right.
Now, the next one is also an interesting one because this, again, we had asked what color was his car, what color was their car. And this is the response that actually came through.
Oh, see, I heard that one. Purple, he talks about you.
Yes. Now, if you listen really close, it actually says purple and white. And then he talks about
Oh, okay.
you.
The white's a little harder to hear.
The white is a little harder to hear, a little quieter.
Yeah, but the purple is very prominent.
Yes. Now, I thought this was really interesting because purple in certain light can be mistaken as burgundy. And vice versa.
Right.
So it could be that this unmarked police car or this unmarked car, whatever it was, or just some crazy guy's car out there killing people, was purple and white.
It could have been, and if you're somewhat colorblind, it's easy to confuse the two as well.
Now, when they say he talks about you, I'm not sure what that means.
That could mean a number of things.
Right.
It could be, I mean, if there were multiple spirits out there, and this one spirit was talking to us, he could have been referring to another spirit. He talks about you. He won't talk to you. He talks about you.
Yeah, it could be.
Just a theory.
Or it could be that whoever this perpetrator was, maybe he's somebody that comes up and ends up talking about his victims to them, you know,
Right.
before he kills them.
Right.
Just sort of as a psychological thing.
That could be.
So, you know, there is another one, and the next one is actually, was he acting like a police officer, or was he acting like a cop? This is one of the things that we had asked there, and this was the response. Was he acting like a police officer or like a park ranger? Yeah. Now, before I even, right when I'm almost done with my question, is when it answers.
Okay.
Because I actually asked two
Because
questions.
I hear a yeah at the end, but then I don't hear the first part. Play it one more time.
Right. I asked two questions, right, one after another, and before I get done with the sentence, it answers the first question. Was he acting like a police officer or like a park ranger?
Yeah. I did hear that word chopping at the back there,
Right,
in the background.
right.
Yeah.
Now, what it says is police car. Again, with the police car. Different location, different set of ghosts, you know, and yet we
Right.
get the same answer that we got the first place. The next one that we have is kind of one that I pulled just to sort of illustrate some of the volley of responses that we got during one particular time period in this spirit box session. And it sounded like, from, if you take these and tie them all together, it sounds like somebody was trying to tell us the course of events.
Cuffed me?
Right, that's exactly right. It says cuffed me.
Right.
Now, that is another, that's one of the pieces that we heard. Another one is this one, which is a little hard to hear.
Shoot him in the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it could be, I'll shoot him in the head.
It could have been cut off. Yeah.
Something right at the very beginning.
That is
you
what
don't
it
really
sounded like,
understand.
absolutely.
But it absolutely says shoot him in the head.
Right.
Now, of course, what are the chances of getting something like that over the radio at the exact
At a place
moment?
where somebody was shot in the head. Yeah.
Yeah, we're too.
Now remember when we were coming back, just briefly, when we were up there, it sounded like at certain points that the word evil came across the radio a couple times.
It did. It did. Now, one of the things I caught was leave, because we had heard that a couple times.
Right.
It did say it sounded like leave, but when I went back over and listened to what we had thought said evil, it didn't sound like evil. It sounded like something else.
So it's interesting how things can sound different.
Yes.
But what also is interesting, though, is could the way that the voice recorder is picking it up because of the close proximity, could that be telling us something a little bit different than what we would hear if the voice recorder was farther away, like where the camera was, or if the audio was piped right into the voice recorder? Depending on the way it's recorded and the way the mic is held to the speaker, could that affect the tone, do you think, and possibly eliminate some responses, or maybe make some responses sound different on that recording than they did when we were there?
Right, it very well could be, because oftentimes we'll take the digital voice recorder and put it close, but not too close. But there are occasions where it's farther away. Things sound different from different distances.
Right.
You're right. So
Right.
It very well could have been. But at the time, we all thought that it said evil. You know, it's evil.
We did. And I think we're definitely going to have to revisit this wildlife refuge in the future.
Oh, yeah.
Revisit a couple of these places and check back in along the way
Right.
to see what kind of evidence we can get at different times.
Absolutely.
But for our next case, I'm going to take us down to Yorktown, and wait till you hear about this one.